Hello, and welcome to the Health GoLive webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at IMO Health. We would like to remind you that the chat feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Grace Vinton.
Hello, Health Innovation family. I am Grace Vinton, Healthcare PR Pro, patient advocate, and podcast host of award-winning podcast High Tea with Grace, where we spill the tea on HIT. I'll be your host for today's webinar, Real-World AI Applications in Healthcare Today. POW! Sponsored by IMO Health. So I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this discussion where we're going to explore the transformative potential of AI and real-world data from bench to bedside and back again. Now, before we dive in, let's take a moment to just understand why this topic should matter to each and every one of us. Imagine a world where patient care and research is personalized, predictive, where workflows are seamlessly efficient and research breakthroughs are happening at lightning speed. Our expert panelists will share real-life examples from their organizations, showcasing how AI is not just a pipe dream tool, but a legit game changer in delivering superior patient outcomes and accelerating medical research. Your engagement in this conversation today is key, so feel free to offer up some questions in the chat, which we will absolutely be taking a look at and including in our conversation today. So get ready to dive into the future of healthcare. And while I introduce today's speakers, who really don't need any introduction, first we have Craig Richardville from Intermountain Health. Craig, thanks for joining us. Then we have Abby Stable from AstraZeneca, very small company no one's ever heard of course. Rajiv Haravu from IMO Health, and then Will Shapiro from Flatiron Health. Thanks so much, all of you, for joining us today. So I think we should start by having the four of you introduce yourselves and elaborate on your role within your organization and how you're directly involved with AI initiatives and implementations. Craig, let's have you start.
Yes, well, thank you for allowing me to be here. So Craig Richardville, Chief Digital Information Officer at Intermountain Health. Artificial intelligence actually fits under a larger program that I have that's called Intelligent Automation. And that program has been out for a while, and it does all the RPA work and other AI type stuff from the past. And so when we look at AI and the newer version with generative AI, that all fits within intelligent automation. So we actually have like a wheel of all the different technologies that we're engaged with and which initiatives are attached to which specific technology. So all that kind of funnels up within the office. We've got several different inputs in terms of demand management coming in from our clinicians, clinical programs. We have a ventures arm, people that that go out to certain conferences or talk to peer networks. All that comes in through a demand management piece, and then we're able to prioritize and do the work.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us today. We're thrilled to learn from you. Abby, I'll have you go next. Tell us a little bit about your role in your organization and how you're involved in AI initiatives.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks for having me on this panel. I'm honored to be alongside my fellow panelists too. So I am leading a lot of our patient-facing solutions when it comes to digital health and AI in the commercial setting. So a lot of different pharmaceutical companies have digital health and AI and technology sitting in different parts of the business, whether it's in R&D, in medical to fuel real-world evidence studies, or in commercial. And I think one of the key pieces with where we sit in commercial is the value comes from scale. So I lead quite a few initiatives, whether it's with technology partners, whether it's with health systems, whether it's with other pharma, to really drive a lot of innovation, patient-facing solutions that do not have our brands on it, but support patient identification, taking algorithms that are potentially built from inside of AstraZeneca, because we have a tremendous amount of scientists doing that for earlier identification of patients, given the push in precision medicine, and taking those and bringing them actually to the healthcare ecosystem, and then innovating in how we build these collaborations to drive scale. So a lot of different roles in the place, a lot of different spaces where we can use AI. AI is such a large catch-all for so many different things. But I would say some of the big areas that AstraZeneca and thus myself and my role are really focusing on is patient identification, both from a commercial molecule perspective as well as a clinical trial recruitment. So right patient, right therapy, right time.
Fascinating. Thanks for joining us, Abby. Next, Rajiv, I'll have you introduce yourself and then let us know a little bit about how you're involved with AI in your organization.
Thanks, Grace. First, I'd like to thank all the audience who joined, and we appreciate your time, and also my fellow panelists for taking the time to have this discussion. My name is Rajiv Haravu. I'm the Senior Vice President for Product Management at IMO Health. The way I am associated with AI is I manage multiple platforms within my company, and one of the platforms is called IMO Clinical AI. And AI is a very broad topic, but my focus is a little narrower. My platform is specifically focused on natural language processing, and even within natural language processing, it's clinical natural language processing and clinical documents specifically. This is a platform that we use across to power a lot of the products across our company, whether it's point of care applications or whether it's life sciences applications. We use this IMO Clinical AI platform, which is about helping create NLP pipelines to extract data from free text clinical narratives, and not only extract data, but I actually normalize it to standard vocabularies, standard taxonomies, and ontologies, so that it could be used for downstream analysis and insights generation. So it's great to be here, and great to meet my fellow panelists, and great to speak to this audience, and I look forward to the conversation.
Oh, love that, Rajiv. So nice to meet you. We all know that clean and clear data, right, is the basis for great AI. So we're going to appreciate your perspective today. And Will, I'll have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit too about how you're using AI in your organization.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace. And thanks to my fellow panelists. It's really an honor to be here with you all, and to the audience. Really excited about this conversation. So I'm the Chief of AI at Flatiron, and also the VP of Data Science. So those are kind of the two big buckets that I focus on. I think with AI, there's kind of four things that I think of as like my core responsibilities. So the first is kind of fostering a dynamic AI center of excellence, and it's a rapidly evolving field. So having conversations in journal clubs and lightning talks is really critical for enabling the team to keep up with everything that's going on. And I'm also particularly keen on democratizing AI and ML across the company. So welcoming people who don't necessarily have that background, because I think it's really important that we have lots of diverse viewpoints and backgrounds represented in AI and ML. I think thought leadership is another big part of my role. When I arrived at Flatiron, coming from consumer technology, I was completely blown away by the caliber of machine learning, and especially by the conversations around quality. Like, I'll say precision and recall never get discussed to such a degree if you're talking about music streaming, which is where I came from. So that was both fascinating to me, and I also felt like really important to get the message out, both internally with our stakeholders within the company, and then also externally to kind of shine a light on all of the amazing work. And then, of course, transforming the business with machine learning and AI is a big part of my job. So whether that's through in-house models that we develop, or also using all of the amazing tools that are available, like coding copilots, AI-enabled knowledge management, et cetera. And then finally, AI governance and risk management is definitely a really important part of my job. So making sure that the solutions that we put in place, whether we build them ourselves or we license them from other companies, comply with regulatory, security, and legal considerations, which are quite considerable in the healthcare space. So yeah, thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much, Will. Very interesting to hear all of the different AI initiatives that you're involved with. So let's start Craig, I'll get back to you. How is AI being used in your organization today to streamline operations, enhance patient outcomes? I know there's so many ways, but what are your favorite ones, I guess?
Yeah, we really have over 100 different initiatives that are currently in place that we're working on. The ones I'll highlight a couple of them. So a couple of them have to do around more the clinical aspects of what we do. So we do have one around pneumonia. We have some around sepsis, things that help with early detection by using the data that's coming in and allowing our caregivers to intervene and to help control and or manage those types of situations, but also a big push now on the experience side. So when we look at healthcare and the complexity of healthcare and some of the regulatory aspects of it, and this is all obviously responsible AI initiatives, we're doing a lot for our physicians and for our caregivers. So I'll give you a couple examples. So we have a product out there called ambient listening. It basically listens to the conversation, right, that's happening between the physician and the patient, and then summarizes that conversation into a medical note. It takes that medical note into what the billing codes are going to be for it. And then that helps provide some of the administrative pieces. We're looking at things like acuity level. We're looking at number of patients able to be seen. We're looking at pajama time, how much time a provider uses the system after hours, really trying to benefit all of those for our caregivers and for our patients who participate as part of it. A big piece of that too now is transitioning over into our nursing workforce. So we'll be piloting. We're getting new code actually this month, and in August we'll be piloting with our nurses. Very similar, where the machine will sit there and listen to the conversation between the family member, the patient, and the nurse. This is more in an acute care setting versus a clinic setting. And it'll take that conversation and start to populate things that are within the documentation system for our electronic medical record, and relieve that administrative burden of the nurse having to do that. We're also looking at things that are more like a surveillance than I'll stop, which is really a camera system that looks at the room. It looks for patient fall risk. If a patient is moving him or herself closer to the edge of a bed, it can go ahead and alarm somebody to come in. It can alarm the patient to get back toward the middle, and or if a caregiver comes in and standing next to a sink, we can look at how much time they stand there for hand washing and other types of requirements there as well. So really several things to help automate the settings that we currently practice in. As we move toward putting all that power back in the hands of the patient, you'll see a lot more on the patient caregiver or the patient side when him or her is not in one of our acute care facilities, and allowing the patient to do a lot of that type of work themselves as well in the future.
That is so cool. It's amazing to think 5 years ago, we could have never imagined any of the things you just spoke about being in existence. And so it's only been 5 years, right? Since that, and so it's amazing the work that you're doing and very exciting to hear about it. And folks that are listening in, please feel free to write questions in the chat. Anything that comes to mind, love to hear what your thoughts are. So this can be interactive with you. Abby, let's go to you. What are some things that excite you about, applications that excite you of AI in your organization?
Yeah, so one, just listening to Craig and how the first piece was basically bringing back the joy of medicine back to the caregiver and the patient relationship. I am a clinician. I left clinical medicine and moved to pharma 7 years ago because of all of the friction that I was already experiencing as a caregiver. So to hear that there are tools now at the bedside to make the job more efficient so that you can spend more time focused on that patient-provider interaction just makes my heart swell. And frankly, that's a lot of what we're doing on the life sciences side is and if you look at AstraZeneca in particular, we have a tremendous pipeline, but this pipeline can create a lot of noise. It can create a lot of noise for patients. It can create a lot of noise for providers and health systems and payers and all of the people that touch healthcare. And so how do we drive precision medicine to the right patients and identifying these patients with more complex biomarkers? That's going to require digital pathology, which is going to require potential innovation around AI, which is a space that hasn't seen a ton of innovation in its existence. But we're identifying very, very specific biomarkers that you can't just build a model based on clinical trial data or even data we purchase. And Flatiron, we are one of your customers, as is every other life science company. You need extremely rich data and real world data to be able to build these algorithms and then validate them in clinical practice and deploy them to identify these patients. We have a rare disease portfolio that is, again, you're finding needles in haystacks, not only from a commercial setting to get those therapies to them, but in clinical trial settings. And we still do a terrible job. There's a huge unmet need in patients getting identified and enrolled in clinical trials. The percentages of patients that are actually in clinical trials in the US is single digits. And when we think about democratizing care and reaching care in a diverse and inclusive way into community-based settings, we're going to have to think innovatively about how to actually identify those patients and bring them into potential sites and then support them even in decentralized clinical trials. So I think I've given you 30 use cases already because there's so much energy and excitement around this. Because at the end of the day, what motivates us as AstraZeneca and me and my job is we're aligned in we want to drive better outcomes for patients. And to do that, we need to leverage technology such as AI.
Absolutely. Well, I'll throw this one over to you now. So what are things that you're doing with AI that excite you, other than what you've already talked about, which is quite a few items that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think Abby touched on a lot of the key ones, honestly. So, at Flatiron, our mission is to improve and extend lives by learning from the experience of every person with cancer. And AI is a critical tool there. It's like directly enables us to deliver on that because learning from the experience of every person with cancer is really hard, right? It's billions of pages of documents. So with ML, we're really enabled to we can radically increase the number of patients that we're able to learn from and the speed at which we can learn from those patients in a world where the standard of care changes so dynamically. Like having timely, up-to-date data is really critical. So, I think it's like, yeah, democratizing who we can learn from and not just the targets of traditional clinical trials is a huge part of what motivates me every day, and really grounds I think the machine learning that we do in something that's very like purpose and mission driven. I think clinical research is certainly an area that also there's enormous potential for AI and ML. And AI at Flatiron enables us to, identify potential matches for trials quickly and accurately in real time, and really think about how to increase the eligible patient pool to ensure that we see underrepresented populations accruing in trials, and ultimately creating a world where medicine is personalized for everyone. So that's I think a big motivation and one of the really exciting things that we're working on at Flatiron. I think also there's a number of places where there's just an enormous administrative burden. So both at the point of care, and then also for site administrators running trials. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is we built a regimen matching tool on top of GPT and some in-house architectures that enables practices to map their regimens to NCCN standards. And the impact of this is huge, right? Because it means that doctors are able to quickly get onto the most recent recommendations from NCCN. And if you're looking at a pretty broad footprint as Flatiron is, where we're kind of all across the country, that immediately has an impact on patient lives. So those are just, I think 3 of the areas that really get me going and are super exciting for me.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Will. We had a question from the audience, and I want to throw this one to Rajiv. The question is, where have you seen the greatest impact of AI thus far in terms of closing gaps in health outcomes between populations? Now, Will kind of answered that already just now in his in what he talked about. And Rajiv, I'd love for you to answer that, and also Craig and Abby, for you to think about that a little bit and answer that. What is this impact of AI on closing these health outcomes and research health outcomes between populations?
So a couple of things, I'd like to answer that in a couple of different ways. And I think it goes to the previous question about use cases, right? So I think ambient was brought up by Craig, and IMO Health is not an ambient AI vendor, but we think of us as a technology enabler. So ambient listening is a very obviously a hot topic that has the potential to change the dynamics of an interaction between a provider and a patient. Right now, it can take away from the burden of a physician or a healthcare worker documenting while talking to the patient, and give their full attention to that encounter with the patient that they're having. And where IMO Health is really helping our ambient AI vendors and partners be able to say, okay, you converted that speech, that interaction between the patient and the physician, or patient and the healthcare worker, into speech to text, which has been a technology that's been around for a long time. Yes, we can take that raw speech to text and convert that into a structured sort of note. But then what happens? What happens to that note? How do you extract meaning? How do you extract a visit diagnosis from that note? You have to take multiple mentions of problems and procedures and medications and labs, which is essentially characterizes the interaction between a healthcare worker and a patient, and be able to put together to come up with a visit diagnosis. How do you do that? You can use natural language processing. You could use technologies like knowledge graphs to infer a visit diagnosis in the background, to be able to populate a problem list for a physician, so that next time a patient shows up, they have a more global picture of the patient that they are treating. So ambient AI, enabling ambient AI to be to understand the semantics, to extract the semantics of what's being captured in that interaction, is a big part of it that we are trying to influence. The second part is essentially about being able to potentially clinical trials, right? How do you enable a provider to see sort of certain open clinical trials at the point of care? And that's something that we can do. You could use natural language processing, specifically AI in general, to be able to read the inclusion-exclusion criteria of a published clinical trial out there, whether it's clinicaltrials.gov or some other source where the clinical trial description is published, and be able to draw out certain very specific criteria for that trial and match that up with the patient that's being seen, or the patient in question, so that maybe their current therapy is not yielding the results it's supposed to yield, and maybe the patient can benefit from the clinical trials that they didn't know about before, or their physician didn't know about before. So those are the two really exciting stuff that we are seeing. And also, from a research perspective, basic things like de-identification of patient records using natural language processing is another big thing. So those are the and the last one I'll end with is in systematic literature reviews, right? This has impacts both for pharma. Obviously during the drug development process, you do a lot of systematic literature reviews, probably 10 or more. I would say probably more. But we can also use systematic literature reviews at the point of care to be able to present evidence about a particular disease they're treating to the physician. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to bring up.
Oh, really interesting. And it, very cool to think about this whole idea of clinical grade AI, AI and clinical grade data, right? It's not just regular, it's clinical grade and semantics. It really understands what's going on in healthcare and research, and can give you what you need. So that's awesome, Rajiv. Craig, I'd love to kind of throw this over to you on the, healthcare side. Pop health. How is AI enabling some of your pop health initiatives over there?
Yeah, I want to start first maybe with a couple of points. One is all the stuff that we're talking, certainly what I'm talking about, these are all assistants, right? None of them really takes the place of the people. It does automate and be more precise with some of the tasks that jobs do. But these are assistants. One of the companies calls them co-pilots. It's not the pilot. So these are tools to help aid in moving through the process. And the other piece, which I think is what was the point making before, is just the responsible AI component of how we're putting this stuff together. When we get these things, and we'll just say ambient listening, it's taken years of development within a certain, large tech company. We receive it, and then we start to prompt it and go through the personalization of it against our data and how well it performs. And when it gets to a certain level of satisfaction, then we start, moving it, into a production environment, and goes by, specialty by specialty. So this is something that isn't just like a light switch. It really is kind of a dimmer switch. And to your point earlier, about 5 years ago, the dimmer is getting, brighter really, really fast. I want to also make sure that, as we're going through this, there's a big regulatory piece that is starting to be prompted around a lot of this work, especially on the generative AI components, but really it's encompassing of it all. And before we have those conversations with our patients, we do ask for their consent to make sure that they understand this is being recorded. Is for the benefit of, the efficiencies and the accuracy, the preciseness of, our conversation. And then everything we produce, we put a disclaimer, that part of this could have been generated through artificial intelligence, to make sure that it's clear that this is something that is a human and machine combination that's being distributed back out. And now when you look at population health, it's interesting because our CEO has given us two major initiatives. One is simplicity. You're seeing it all around this type of work. The second one is proactive care, is where you're going with some of the population health piece. Those are two things that nearly all of our work, we have to test it against those two bars and make sure that we're moving those bars. So when you look at the population health side or proactive care, a component, we're really focusing on moving things upstream, making sure that we can do early diagnosis, helping stay healthy and well, helping you manage chronic diseases, helping you guide you to the right, next in your care journey, filling care gaps that are missing, and then also going through, as I talked about initially, even like things like pneumonia and sepsis, some other types of things. So it really has a large play when you start looking at proactive care, or you start looking at the population health of our members and or our patients. How do we bring all that data together, the cleanliness of that data, and then use that data with this machine on top of it to assist us in making sure that those prompts and those connections take place, and then the follow through that's happening from the patient, because a lot of that is patient taking initiative once we're able to assist them through that journey. So it's hard to imagine. It's kind of like going out to the web now, the internet. It's hard to imagine something not having, AI as being a part of it. I mean, it happens today when you look at Netflix or use your GPS, all those automations are in play, and this will continue that within the healthcare setting.
So interesting. And I kind of love this whole idea of simplicity too. It does seem like people, when they're, diving into AI, it's like, oh, let's try everything and anything and throw it all against the wall. But that whole idea of simplicity is very interesting, kind of North Star to include in that. So thanks for sharing that, Craig. Abby, let's throw this to you. Let's talk about population health, but I want you to address the whole regulatory space of patient privacy conversation that Craig was mentioning on the healthcare side. If you could kind of intertwine the whole two, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so we're a regulated pharmaceutical company, so regulatory, privacy, de-identified data, that is governance. I eat, sleep, and breathe that. We can't walk out the door and touch a patient without having our compliance, our data privacy officers, and our regulatory folks at the table. So, and when we think about AI and what is happening in AI, and we started this in SAMD with software as a medical device, and now we're seeing this growth in AI as medical devices. I actually think that's extremely important because you're talking, at the end of the day, you're talking about a patient's life. And when we think about then that changes everything. And coming from a pharmaceutical company where it takes, on average 7 years from bench to patient, because of all of the checks and balances that go into the process of taking a drug from bench to patient, there's a reason for that. And we take patient safety very seriously, and we take the patient's ownership of their data very seriously. So as a pharmaceutical company, we're never able to receive identifiable data. So even when we purchase data from a partner like Flatiron, that is all de-identified. And I work in a global role, so I understand data requirements beyond the US. We've got GDPR, and every local entity has their own regulatory requirements around data. I think at the core of it is the patient owns the data. And if the patient is sitting inside of the health system is then the steward of the patient's data. So getting patients' consent at the patient's level, then also the consent to share data at the health system level, and then the consent to share data with your third-party technology partner that potentially is stewarding the data is incredibly important. And I've spent a lot of years over the last part of my career figuring out how to contractually structure that so that everyone, again, the ownership of the data is very clear, the consent is clear, the de-identification is clear, and the governance internally from life sciences of what are we going to do with that data. So that's another big piece is the data has to be firewalled from certain parts of our business, such as our commercial business. It has to sit in medical. It has to have governance around it and stewardship around it. We take data extremely seriously, which is also why a lot of the algorithms we build internally aren't viable to just pass over the fence and deploy on a health systems data set, because we're missing a lot of the data that exists. And so that's where partnering with health systems and innovative health systems, Craig mentioned it, core to the value of Intermountain is earlier diagnosis. That's core to the value of AstraZeneca. When we look at chronic disease, we have a portfolio that supports delaying progression of disease in a diabetic patient from moving to heart failure and CKD. And we build a ton of evidence that we publish in the greatest journals in the world, but those things just stack up in clinicians' offices because there's no way they can keep up with all of this. So it takes an innovative approach to how do we actually translate those guidelines into medical practice. And that's where partnering with outside of life sciences, with tech and with health systems and with payers, we're all aligned to the same thing, which is earlier diagnosis, patients living healthier longer. And we see a great opportunity to do that, leveraging innovative data.
Sounds like quality and security need to be within the genome of the data itself. So Will, let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because I feel like between you and Rajiv, you have this covered. So Will, tell me, how do you ensure the data is de-identified properly and securely?
Well, I'll definitely caveat that by saying this, like, Flatiron is built on a foundation of consent and de-identification. So it was well established before I joined 3 years ago. I'll say certainly with ML, when we were really unable to unlock the full patient population that we have access to, there's obviously more complexity about making sure that a group is not identifiable, and we work with statistical experts to ensure that that's the case. I think it's also a critical aspect of whenever we're using something like an LLM or generative AI tools, which of course we're really excited to get our hands on. There's a ton of additional legal and regulatory complexity with getting access to those tools, and that's so like Llama comes out or GPT-4, and everyone on my team is like can't wait to start playing with it. But there's quite considerable security review. And of course, PHI is one of the main things that we're thinking about in working with these tools. So it's certainly a really important consideration. I think on the quality front, one of the big questions I have with this new generation of like general purpose models, which I think are really exciting in that they can do so many different things. But it's how do you ensure that for whatever use case you're interested in, they're fit for use, right? And how do you ensure that they're not biased? In particular, right? Like when something is trained on the internet, which is full with all different kinds of biases, how do you ensure for this task that I'm specifically trying to do, I'm not going to get biased results? So I think that's where having data at the scale that Flatiron has enables us to really stratify all of our models across age, race, ethnicity, gender, biomarker status, and ensure that none of our results are biased towards one group or another. And I think that's a really critical consideration that's often lost in like the conversation and the excitement about these general purpose LLMs and generative AI tools.
Absolutely. Rajiv, I'll have you answer this question too. I feel like you have a lot to add here.
Right. I think you mentioned two things, right? Quality and security, and we'll sort of went deeper into the identification bit. Quality is about yes, I mean we have lots of things called foundation models. We have GPT-4, we have other sort of Llama 3 and Anthropic and so many other companies and products that they're producing into our foundational models. And our approach but those are not, our experience has been, and I speak to my experiences, our experience has been, those are very powerful tools, but not enough. And yes, you need to guard against what you've heard in what a lot of us have heard about hallucinations, and to be able to define as to be able to give an answer with a degree of certainty without any data backing it up, right? That's a sort of a layman's definition of a hallucination. And the way we feel that we guard against that, the quality of answers we generate, is to be able to constrain what we ask these foundational models, these large language models, as they are called, with very carefully crafted prompts that are backed up with some real world data, so that when the large language model actually answers that question, it has context. And now does the probability of hallucination come to zero? The answer is no, but you start to reduce some of that probability to be able to fashion your questions or your prompts to these large language models with context, with data that we have, that we've curated, that we can provide the large language model along with our question so that we get good answers. So I think that has to do a lot with quality. And the other thing about quality is constant measurement about how the thing about AI is you can't just deploy it and just forget about it, right? So now how do you implement a surveillance mechanism to see if there's like a drift towards it giving wrong answers? And that's a really challenging but extremely important part from our experience, is how do you constantly keep track of it to see if it's giving you accuracy. And there are many ways to measure accuracy, and that's probably a webinar but in and of itself. But how do you constantly surveil the performance of these solutions that you're deploying? So those are some of the examples of, from my experience, the quality in terms of quality of answers that these systems produce.
I'd love to throw this question of potential bias and ethical concerns kind of out there to Craig and Abby. How are you kind of addressing this whole thought of, potentially the data having bias and ethical concerns? Are there things that you're throwing at the data set to make sure that's not happening? I know you're probably getting the data set hoping they do that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? Abby, you start.
Okay. Bad data, like junk data in, means junk data out. So we spend a lot of time figuring out and identifying good sources of data that provide a well-represented, diverse data set. So even And again, there's the depth, like you want very deep data, but then sometimes you don't get the breadth of data. So it's often a give and take. And I am certainly not a data scientist. I will be the first to raise my hand and say that, but I've learned enough to be dangerous through some strategic partnerships that we have with health systems that have extremely well curated data sets, because those data sets have fueled their internal research organizations. And I've learned a lot in that when you think about trying to get a diverse patient population, I still think there's significant gaps in actually finding rich data sets to avoid bias, because to actually reach those patients and capture their data, you have to be out into the community. And oftentimes it's the same problem that a health system has. Those patients don't have access to care, thus they don't have access to the tools to capture their data, to then leverage that data to reduce bias in the models we're building. So, and I know that there's been a ton of effort around improving our HIEs and bringing in social determinants of health, but I don't think we've actually solved this at scale yet. And it is a true problem. And the problem is not just about, well, where does this data sit? When you think about it, it's really, well, where is care actually being delivered? And there's still a huge gap between a patient having access, if they're in a rural setting, to care and to tools that can deliver them the care that they all deserve, or if they're in an urban setting sitting next to an academic medical center that's been capturing their data through a patient-reported outcome tool or their digital front door, or they've been an Epic user for 20 plus years and they've already curated their data and they've linked it with the biobank and you name it. It's just a very different model of care. And I think there's still a tremendous gap in the US, and that's actually leading to the issues we have with bias.
Yeah, just inequity generally with interoperability, with, not being able to, like you said, get access to that data in rural areas, and it being a challenge, and that kind of perpetuating those things, which hopefully as interoperability gets better and better, we start solving some of those problems, right? And we start creating these models that get smarter and smarter. Craig, let's talk a little bit about challenges. What challenges has your organization faced in implementing AI solutions? And how have you, as an organization, overcome some of those obstacles to achieve some of the positive outcomes you've talked about today so far?
Yeah, the challenge is there's a few, I would say. One is really just making sure that you prioritize the work based upon the vision of the company, the mission, the strategic values, the initiatives, kind of going through that whole piece, because there's just so much opportunity out there in this space. So prioritization would be really important to make sure there's very strong alignment. Two is to understand that this isn't the panacea, right? It's a tool, it's an assistant. As I mentioned earlier, it's a co-pilot, it's something to help you do your job better, faster, cheaper. And that's another challenge I think to overcome, is just making sure that where this plays in the piece. That's why I really liked what Abby said, because when you look at some of the pieces of the data itself and have it coming out, and some of the bias that's already got built into how some of these models work, if you don't really know how it works on the inside. That's why it always takes a human to be able to go through, review, take a look at it, dot the I, cross the T, and continue to reteach and the machine to be better the next time around, because it does fill in when it doesn't have the answer. It fills in those kinds of gaps. And I think the last one is really to understand that it's not cheap, it's expensive. And so as you build your business case and you build the outcomes that you want to derive from it, to be able to make sure that that you're balancing the input that's going into it and the outcomes that you expect to achieve. It's expensive, but I hope over time it'll become less and less, but it is something that you really have to put a concerted effort toward. And that's why in our case, and many times we look for partners, different tech partners, different solution partners to work with us and going through it. They can help build a lot of that stuff that's more industry wide, where we will take things that will be unique and special to what we want to be able to deliver back at Intermountain Health, and then be able to share that going all the way across. So it's really, a partnership, I think, would be the last thing to make sure that we put into play.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to throw this one to you, and all of you get ready to answer this question, right? What are challenges either you or your customers are facing implementing AI solutions?
Yeah, sure. I can think of a bunch. So, I think Flatiron really built its reputation on the quality of its real world data for oncology, and kind of set the standard. And the approach it took historically was hiring clinical experts to manually review charts and extract data elements. So coming into that environment where there was kind of like a strong historical precedent, and then saying, ML is actually a valid way of doing this as well. And it's, in fact, a really critical part of truly delivering on our mission to learn from every person with cancer. So I think that was certainly a challenge. And I think that there were a couple of key pieces that made the conversation really expedited it. So the first one was, identifying tasks that ML can just do better than humans can. So like there's needle in a haystack things like identifying comorbidities in the chart, or whether someone's a smoker or not. They can literally be buried in hundreds of pages of documents. And ML is just very well suited for that kind of task in a way that a human will never be. So that was really impactful. And then I think we've thought a lot about how to evaluate the quality of models. One of the most powerful techniques that we've had is we've demonstrated that ML data can replicate the findings that you'd have with human abstracted data. So that's been powerfully convincing to say, okay, you will reach the same conclusions with an ML extracted variable as you would with one that's been abstracted by humans. So I think that was one of the first major challenges. I think another challenge is really zooming into the point where ML is actually impactful versus like a cool, nice to have thing. And in fact, anticipating it in advance. So getting ahead of the inflection point where all of a sudden it's critical to have ML, and getting that timing right, I think is definitely a challenge. And then, I think the third thing is actually thinking about how to integrate ML into workflows. So, while it is the case that some things are really useful just off the shelf, it's often the case that ML is really most useful as part of a whole built out user experience. And so that obviously takes more investment. It takes conviction that it's going to be kind of worth the squeeze, as it were. But yeah, I think those are three of the major challenges we face with ML.
Interesting. Rajiv, how about you? What are some of the challenges you or your customers are seeing constantly with implementations?
Sure. I think one of the, you hear a lot about, AI replacing human beings, and there's a lot of discussion about that. And that may come to pass sometime in the future. But my experience, and I certainly don't have an opinion on the subject, but this is my experience, right? To create algorithms that have their basis in machine learning, you need a lot of people with a lot of very distinct skill sets. So for example, you need to train a model based on a training data set. You need to annotate that data set. If you're talking about the clinical space, you need physicians, you need coders who understand the document that they're seeing, the clinical context. They are, actually helping annotate those documents that are used to train a machine learning model. So you need a very specific skill set who are clinical backgrounds and medical coding backgrounds and things like that. Then you need NLP architects. Then you need data analysts and data science folks. So it takes skill sets. It takes a lot of people to make an artificial intelligence sort of solution come to life. So there's when I hear AI replacing humans, and I compare that to my own experience It's like you need a lot of people to make this thing look really nice out there. So just an interesting observation, just from my point. I'm not saying that you won't have generalized intelligence in the future. I am no way qualified to look into my crystal ball to make that prediction. But it's an interesting thing. Like, you need people to make this thing work, and you need a lot of skill sets across clinic, medicine and computer science and data science to be able to make it happen. Second challenge is there's a lot of talk about large language models, but they are very resource hungry beasts. Let's just call it that, right? They cost a lot of money to run. And as somebody who was in product management, how do I fashion a cost-effective solution to provide my customer? So that's a challenge that we have to deal with. How do you do that? Can you use LLM sparingly for the most difficult questions? Can you pair supervised machine learning approaches with large language model approaches to arrive at some sort of a hybrid solution so that I can control the costs, my costs, and then also offer a better deal to my customer in terms of the price I charge them? So those are the second part, is the nitty-gritty of providing cost-effective solution to my customers. And then flexible deployment options, right? In healthcare, yes, I can build everything that's hosted in my cloud. I can pick a foundation model. I say, I'm going to go with GPT-4 and nothing else. But the thing is, then you confront reality where customer says, no, this has to be in my cloud environment. No, this has to be on my data center on-prem. And that happens a lot within healthcare. So and I have to be flexible in the kinds of large language models I pick to use within my application. That means I have to be agnostic to the LLM. So that means I have to fashion a solution that can work with multiple foundation models. So deployment options, flexible deployment options is a challenge. So we need to design our solutions to be able to be flexibly deployed in our cloud or in the customer's cloud or on-prem and things like that. So those are some of the big challenges that we have seen on our side.
Interesting. So interesting. Abby, now let's go to you on the research side of things. What challenges are you all facing, and what are the key factors that will drive future success and adoption of AI in your space?
So, shiny new toy. AI is so exciting. There's so much buzz around it across every industry. And we're a big company, and our executives and our leaders are sitting across from other leaders in other industries that are all talking about the same thing. And we're all hungry to innovate. To Rajiv's point, it's incredibly complex. And so you see this very shiny new toy that looks and sounds so slick. Well, why don't we just deploy this algorithm? Okay, we validated it. Now let's scale to 30 health systems in the US. And you're like, no, because their data sets look completely different. There's no one unified data model, and you got to go health system by health system. And it's incredibly complex. So I think the biggest challenge we have is managing expectations. And to Rajiv's other point, these are very costly. And as a life science company, we are used to spending in the traditional spend. This is non-traditional spend. And what we've done in the past is we do pilots, much like health systems and payers do. We do little pilots, and if it doesn't work, then we add them to the pilot graveyard. This area needs long-term strategic investment with the right people at the table that's curating either the partnerships or the build internally to manage the expectations, to teach the leadership as we are learning, because we're all still learning in this space. No one has solved this. So I think and then the last thing I'll say is technology is fantastic, but if it's not accompanied by the change management, then it goes into the graveyard. And we saw this like EHR, the cost that it took for health systems to implement EHRs. And I remember going through the trainings as a clinician. It was painful, but you have to have that kind of change management. You can't just deploy these tools into an already noisy workflow and think that clinicians and patients will adopt them. It takes a ton of behavior change. It takes learning. It takes building trust, all of those things. And I think that's one of the areas that we cannot lose sight of with all of this technology and innovation. You have to continue to invest in the change management aspect. And that often takes, again, long-term strategic investment to allow these things to be deployed well.
Abby, pulling out your crystal ball, 1 minute. What AI innovation in your space do you feel is going to be very exciting to see in 5 to 10 years down the road?
I think it's the precision medicine, identifying patients with leveraging, biomarkers, genetic testing, clinical notes, and clinical data, building algorithms to identify those patients, and using those same algorithms for both clinical trial as well as, identifying patients earlier for progression of disease.
Same question to you, Will. 1 minute or less.
Yeah, actually pretty much the same answer. I think truly personalized medicine for everyone, not just kind of the traditional targets of clinical trials. I actually got my grounding in ML and in building personalized music recommender systems. And while it's radically different than personalized cancer therapies, there's something in common, which is that if you have rare taste in music like I do, or if you have rare disease, you're less likely to get a really good personalized or targeted therapy. So I think it is kind of a machine learning problem, and I think AI and machine learning will play key roles, whether that's enabling drug discovery in new kinds of ways like AlphaFold, or clinical decision support to navigate an increasingly complex and granular landscape. I think AI has a really important role to play in making precision medicine a reality for everyone.
So encouraging and inspirational. We live in such a world filled with so many trials, and to hear about the innovations you are all implementing, you can't help but be inspired and have some hope, right? That, maybe this industry is changing and will change for the better. Rajiv, what about you? 1 minute or less.
Yeah, the short term is ambient. I think improving the quality of interaction between a caregiver and the patient is, I think, very important. And I'm a patient in a different context, and I'd like that quality of interaction to improve. So that's short. That is happening today in many aspects, as and Craig mentioned one example of that. And the second thing is, yes, bringing the life sciences. I'm excited about life sciences, but how do you bring the life sciences thing with the point of care? Like, how do I bring those together in some way? And trials is one thing, like knowing trials. There are 5,000 publications. If I forgive me if I got my number wrong, there are 5,000 publications in PubMed every day. So how do you expect a physician to keep on top of their of what's happening in their fields? How do you synthesize that information using techniques like natural language processing, using the power of generative AI, especially large language models, and to be able to synthesize that evidence at the point of care so that they can materially affect the kind of treatment that they're giving. And those are the things that I see are the beautiful challenges I'd like to tackle, and I'd like to see opportunities.
Awesome. That's amazing. Craig, how about you? 1 minute or less. AI.
Yeah, I'll go back. Yeah, thanks, Grace. I'll go back to our strategic initiatives on the simplicity side to, I hope within the healthcare ecosystem, to be able to remove the waste that currently happens today. And some of that goes back to the unprecise of how been discussed with how some of the treatments are. And the other piece is also the bureaucratic piece, to be able to remove those costs out, to be able to repurpose those expenses to more on the delivery side, but I would like to focus too on the second part, which is the proactive, really moving it upstream as opposed to great precision treatment. I like to be able to see how we can be more proactive on prevention and keep people healthy and well as the early detection piece. Once it is detected, certainly be able to go through the process that's been described, but move upstream another step.
Thanks to our expert panelists for being so generous and sharing their valuable experiences. Thanks to Health for the awesome platform, IMO Health for sponsoring, and thanks for your engagement and the great questions that have fueled the conversation today. Keep innovating, my friends, because your innovations are saving lives and making this industry a better place. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you to IMO Health and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth.com to catch up on all Health Go Live webinars. And join us in Las Vegas, October 20th through 23rd for Health 2024.